Welcome to the State of the Nation Weekly Update. My name is Mike Sham, and by now you know that we tackle an issue. And I've been taken with one very big issue recently, and that is bang for your tax buck and what we should do about it. But I want to begin with a history lesson. I was there when the new South Africa came into being. In actual fact, I was there when the old South Africa was busy stuttering and dying. And the new South Africa then came into sight, and I was very much aware of the process that was taking place. I was hopeful that it would work, and I think we got about our best result that we could in 1994. But we've got to understand that that process, like many things in life, was built on a couple of accepted lies from both sides, from all sides. A lot of lying went on. And what happened is we became comfortable with those lies, and we've let them just sort of sit there without being dealt with. And gradually we've seen problems as we've gone along. So let's just discuss the lies that we live with in the new South Africa. Let's start with the first one, that there was that what happened in 1994 and the birth of the new South Africa was as a result of some kind of armed struggle. It's an absolute lie. There was never a time when two armies faced off and eventually one side said, "We surrender, you can have it." No, not even close. We were fighting dirty little wars in far away places. Most of the fighting wasn't between the South African Defence Force and Mkhonto with Sizwe or any liberation army. No, they were stuck away in Quattro and other bases, hundreds of kilometers from where the action was. If there was any real military fighting, it was between proxy troops, Cubans, SWAPO, etc. But 1994 rolls around, or in fact 1990, after the release of Nelson Mandela. And it was decided to say, okay, it wasn't really the sanctions that brought us here, but it was a struggle. Whatever it is, we're here now. And we've let this lie fester that it was a result of some kind of insurrection. It wasn't. The country was financially isolated. The citizens were getting tired of the way the country was going. Young men were tired of going to the army. And there seemed to be no future. And this was putting enormous pressure on the apartheid government that were out of step with the world. But what was the most important thing that led to the new South Africa? Well, without question, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of communism. Suddenly it meant that whichever government came in would have to toe the one line that all countries toe, and that is towards democracy, free markets, etc. And suddenly it was safe to negotiate. And negotiate we did. And, CODESA and all of that, a whole lot of clever people got around the table, decided let's plot a road ahead. Then there was the Faustian Pact, I'd like to call it, and that was on the other side of the aisle. And that was to say, South Africa had a very well-developed economy, run almost completely by whites. Blacks were excluded. Not their fault. It was the law of the land. But it had been built into a properly industrialized economy. In many ways, it was hyper-industrialized because of isolation. So what you have now is a small, call it first world economy being run by by a minority white population, and a big black population that's been excluded from the levers of power and the economic resources of the country. And now you've got a government that represents that black majority coming in there, but they desperately need the economy that's being run by white South Africans. So we do a deal. We say it's a new country, belongs to everybody. We'll take the money that you're generating out of this economy and redistribute it. Fine. It seems like it's the only road out. What are the alternatives at this point? The ANC can't go back into the struggle because their backers, being the Soviet Union, have collapsed. So they couldn't get backing for it. Likewise, the apartheid government couldn't go to the West and say, sell us arms or buy our industrial products. We were isolated if we didn't do this. So basically, both sides were stuck with each other. So we end up in a deal that worked. It worked, saying, let's keep the old economy going and gradually bring more and more people into it. And so it goes. Taxes are paid. Everybody's happy. Along the way, some of the big companies decide, well, you know what's a good idea is that people are looking around at some of the places where everybody's spending their money and saying, we don't really like doing business only with white people. Fair enough. And some of the companies that found it easiest to moved. So big companies, listed companies especially, started to do their own version of BEE. This started early. This started in the late 1980s. What you do is you bring a couple of black board members along, you give them a couple of shares. They sit on your board. They're not in executive positions. They just sit there. But at least your board isn't completely white and male. And it worked. It worked. Then the second administration comes in, Thabo Mbeki, a little bit more forthright in his opinions, and he really gets going on the BEE. We start having more and more laws. Fine, still enough left over for the people running the companies. And the country kept on going. But one of the big parts of this deal, the unsaid part, was that the white population can keep their house, they can keep their farm, they can keep their business. Give a little piece away, but keep it. You can still make a lot of money. But most importantly, pay your taxes. And whatever you do, don't complain about paying your taxes. And it worked. We pay taxes. Country did quite well, especially, the first 15 years post-democracy. Country opens up to the world. There's more money being made than ever, more taxes being collected. And then, of course, what we had was we had two things that started to really weigh on the country. One was corruption. That was on the front page of the newspaper. We could see that. The other one was massive inefficiency. So never employ one person to do a job if you can employ 5. And, of course, the unions, being part of the ANC alliance, insisted that if people were there and they were superfluous to requirements or were bad at their job or were devious or broke the law, that you could really do not much about it. And gradually we lived with this bargain, and it's a bit like where you keep on loading the back of the bakkie and it's going well over the recommended load, but you just keep on loading. And the pact being that the person whose bakkie this is just doesn't say a word about it. That way he keeps ownership of his bakkie. Now this worked, as I said, and it was all fine until both the corruption and the inefficiencies started to get very, very expensive. And by now, those people with access to the government were not able to deliver any services because they never really had to. Now understand, at this point, the infrastructure is pretty good. Much like your own house, your own car. You don't need to service it. When they say service your car once a year, well, listen, you go to the 13th month, it's still going okay. 14th month, it's still going okay. But at some point you're going to start having problems. If you don't fix your drains at home, at some point they're going to break, the pipes, etc. It's just the way it works. Infrastructure will age. So for the first 15 years, we get the benefit of higher taxes. Infrastructure that's holding up, in other words, the road surfacing is fine. Should have been resurfaced, but who knows? It's still okay. We don't have a pothole yet. And of course, everything comes to a head in the last period where people start getting real problems. The power goes off. Why? Because the plants haven't been maintained, because the management is inefficient, the workers aren't working properly. But of course, the pact holds, and that is, if you are generating those taxes, the threat is keep quiet. And you can just say nothing. Along the way, one or two business people tried. I remember back in the early days of the New South Africa, there was a CEO of FNB put an ad in a newspaper when people still used to read newspapers complaining about crime. And he got slapped down by government. In fact, he lost his job. Yeah, another lesson. Keep quiet, stay in your lane. Don't do anything about this. Don't say anything about these inefficiencies. And we'll let you keep operating in the country. And of course, this pact has held. But on the other side, of course, what we've seen is the state get more and more bloated. And now for somebody like myself, you see that if you really want to make money, you want to work in government. And you think to yourself, this is the wrong way around. It shouldn't be that you work for the state where you're guaranteed an income, where you don't work yourself to death, you don't take risk, you don't do anything, you just do your job. That you get paid more than in the private sector where you have to do all of those things, take risk, take responsibility, possibly lose your job. Now we've got a bloated state, but we still have the trade union with the government saying, you better not right-size this business because we can't have job losses. In fact, we've got a whole middle class that's been born out of our taxes that have been paid for these inefficiencies. Now, in the meantime, what we have is we've had South Africa dramatically integrate. There's not a suburb now in South Africa that isn't integrated. And it's time for certain parts of this pact, this agreement, the non-spoken part to be spoken about. And that is, if you live in a suburb, you pay rates, you should have a certain expectation of a service. 20 years ago, keep quiet because you're in a white suburb and you're white and you better not say something. But now, any suburb you go to, the demographics don't look like that. But our city fathers and our politicians will still say, the money can't go to those suburbs. We can't fix your roads. We can't fix your water. Stop complaining because there's people in shacks. Now, South Africa has got probably the most redistributive policies in the world. We give more money away than almost any government in the world. When people say we need a socialist revolution, I can promise you there's not a socialist country in the world that pays so much money to people who are unproductive as what we have in South Africa. And I was wondering whether it isn't time for the taxpayers, all of us, everybody watching. You're a taxpayer, probably a taxpayer. How do I know that? Because you can afford a device to watch this on. You can afford the airtime. You probably have a job. You probably pay taxes. And there's a very good chance that you aren't white. So don't you think by now it's time to end the unspoken bit and to say, hey, I'm a taxpayer and I deserve bang for my buck. And I think the time is right for that. And I think it's right because we've got a government of national unity that I'm a big fan of because I think it's the best solution we could have under the circumstances right now. But while the country is supposedly moving forward, it would be really timiest to go and say to that government, say, actually, before, when the ANC was in power by themselves and they could hide their corruption, steal as much as they like, there was very little to do anything about it. We saw that with this throughout the state capture years. Steal away, take as much money as you like. If you're a white person that says something about it, you're a racist. If you're a black person that says something about it, you're a clever black. There were ready insults, and everybody just went back to their corners. But I think now that we've got a country that's hopefully looking forward, if we have avoided the doomsday scenario that so many people are calling for, then let's do this properly. Let's really hold our government to account at every level. And I've got to tell you that I've been doing a little bit of investigation to find out what would it take for us long-suffering taxpayers to start a tax revolt, done properly, where you put your money in a very transparent account. You don't pay it over to the authorities unless they meet certain criteria, unless certain questions are answered, unless there's proper accountability. Because I reckon that if you had done this 10 years ago, you would have had no traction for this, because it would have been just too easy to keep quiet and just too dangerous to do it. But I think now that you've got a coalition government or many parties within government, it's going to be very hard for them to justify the lack of value that you are getting for your tax rand. And I think that right now we would get a response. And I think that the place to start is at local government level. Now, we've seen it in some of the smaller places where it's a little bit easier to do it when you're a little village or a dorpie somewhere where you can say, oh, yeah, we are, there's only 100 houses, we can speak to everybody in one locale and we can organize ourselves. But I think the time has come to investigate what we can do on a bigger level at our cities. Let's imagine. Right now, earlier this week, I spoke to a politician who's telling me how they're going to collapse the Tshwane municipality, that they're pretty happy with their performance with. Why they're going to do it? Because they can. What's going to be the impact? The people that put that metro of Tshwane in trouble are going to come back into power. They're going to put their friends back in. They're going to award contracts to those people. And the city is going to lose more of your ratepayer money. And I just think it's unacceptable. And it's too long to wait another 5 years for another election before we punish a party that breaks something or does a dirty, dodgy deal. So I don't know what you think about it, and I'd love to see your comments about it. But I really think that it's time that we do a proper deep dive into tax revolts, starting at local government level and moving our way up until the government becomes responsible, until the government understands that when you pay X amount in tax, you should get X amount in value. Now, South Africans have been very generous. We've been very, very generous and very happy to see our money spent on people that aren't as lucky as we are. And I'm not suggesting that we do not redistribute money, and the government is the right vehicle for that. But I don't want to redistribute my money to a parliamentarian. There's somebody in parliament who's busy going through a divorce where the wife is saying she wants 250,000 rand a month because that's what she lives off. His salary is 1.5 million rand a year. Where's that 250,000 rand a month coming from? And what does the state do? They do nothing about it. The government does nothing about it. The law agencies do nothing about it. We've got Zondo, even retired after he did his Zondo commission, still nobody being held to account. Do you think it's time for real tax advocacy, for us to really move this thing and say, we want some answers for our tax money? We're not just going to hand it over. We want to know that you are managing it properly. If you think this is a good idea, let me know. But in the meantime, support somebody who is doing something better. Go and rent a car from Pace Car Rental. They employ a lot of people. That helps the country. And let's keep on thinking of constructive ways that hurt our government a little bit to making the right decisions. Right? And if you want to hear more about this, stay tuned to the State of the Nation. So I hope you've subscribed. I hope you watch this. And let me know what you think. See you next week.